Well, it's time for our panel of political commentators this week. Greg MacEachern is a Liberal commentator, Tim Power is a Conservative commentator, and Robin MacLachlan is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about Jason Kenney and C69, a threat to national unity, says it is essentially lighting a bonfire under successionist sentiment out there in Alberta. Greg, what do you think of what he's saying here? Is he sort of speaking for his constituents in Alberta? Is he being alarmist and just trying to make life miserable for the Liberals?
Well, it's not surprising, and to be fair, he kind of continues on a note from his predecessor. I think if you're an Albertan, you have an issue with this. Bill, I think the challenge or the danger for Conservatives on this is when it starts to seem like it's part of the anti-Trudeau campaign instead of a case-by-case, policy-by-policy difference of opinion. A lot of the rhetoric around this sounds very similar to the rhetoric around carbon pricing, for example. So again, it's
in other words, you think setting up a wall of opposition to Justin Trudeau for the sake of setting up a wall of opposition to Justin Trudeau.
And whether or not this is part and parcel of that Maclean's cover from a couple of months ago, where you had all these Conservative provincial leaders as well as Andrew Scheer. We really haven't seen a lot of coalitions like this in Canada before, where for partisan reasons, premiers gang up together. And if you look at some of the things that Doug Ford says, you hear very similar messages from Scott Moe and now from Jason Kenney. So again, the challenge is, if you're a Conservative, if this is just starting to seem by people who are perhaps objective, haven't made up their mind, or of another party, they just go, well, it's just part because you don't like Trudeau.
Okay, Tim?
Except if you go further east and you see in Newfoundland and Labrador, where resources and the development of them are a big issue. Premier Ball, who the last time I checked was a Liberal premier, is not a fan of C69, and he's expressed publicly his disappointment with some of the measures in C69 and is challenging some of them behind closed doors. So I think
Premier New Brunswick, he's a Conservative, but Blaine Higgs is saying the same thing. But yeah, to Greg's point, that's part of the wall, I guess.
But I think you'd be mistaking solely to say it was a partisan alignment in resource-generating provinces, resource-creating provinces. It's a real concern because there is a sense that there might be a hand of over-regulation at play. I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say it could go in and become an issue of national unity, even with the partisanship, because people are feeling vulnerable. Affordability is going to be a huge issue, and if people are making their livings in these resource industries and not feeling that it's going to be easier to do so or it's going to be more difficult to do so, that's a challenge for whoever's in office.
And Robin, it's not as if the former NDP Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley, didn't say, look,
during the campaign,
some of these policies are making Albertans feel like, the rest of the country doesn't care about what's happening out here. So what do you think about the points Jason Kenney's trying to make here, and where do they go?
Yeah, so no, it's true. I'd say the Western alienation, probably more specifically Alberta alienation, is palpable. Like, it's a real thing, and it's a real problem for any partisan leader of this country. And I think it's a problem for all of us because there are many Albertans who see themselves greatly as Canadians. But when they don't see themselves reflected in the decisions and the conversation happening in Ottawa, then that's a problem that no matter what political stripe you are. Jason Kenney is, as Greg touched on, he's continuing his electoral campaign. He was quite successful in campaigning against Justin Trudeau. He did not want to campaign against Rachel Notley. He campaigned against Justin Trudeau.
Campaigned against Justin Trudeau.
Exactly, and it worked. It worked for him, and he's going to continue that campaign because it's important for him to kind of consolidate and show that he's living up to the promises he made to Albertans. Now, the challenge for the government with C69 is that they've made it a very polarizing piece of legislation, and they also promised in the campaign that piece of legislation was going to be in place for the approval of Trans Mountain. And instead, they approved Trans Mountain through an ad hoc process. So they kind of tried to have their cake and eat it too. We'll approve Trans Mountain so Alberta will be happy with us. Then we'll bring in C69 so environmentalists will be happy with us. Instead, they have everybody upset at them right now.
Greg? I mean, there's he's raising a couple of things here, but that the Western alienation and the feelings of Albertans. Also, just trying to make the case, as others have, that the government's trampling on provincial jurisdiction here. That some of the projects they now say they want to, regulate, or at least apply this new assessment process to, including the in situ development oil sands projects was previously the purview of the province. The federal government has no business involved in it, but the federal government says it's going to get involved with it in the case of Alberta, unless Alberta leaves the cap there, the emissions cap of 100 million.
The challenge is, though, under that process, the pipelines weren't getting built. So again, I don't think you should look at it in isolation. You should look at what happened previously. It's not happening. So this is a way that they say it's going to happen, whether it's Trans Mountain or Northern Gateway. This is the way they want to do it. I'm not going to dispute that there are a lot of things that this government has done that are seemingly tone deaf in terms of the way that they're communicated. And I think that they think that they're going to be a political wedge issue, but the wedge is actually coming back a little bit on them. I think if you step back a little bit and look at what they want to do with the bill, there's still some things that are the same as before. I mean, the final decision rests with cabinet.
Right.
So the problem they have, and Greg and Robin have hit on it a bit, is if they water this thing down so much, they lose the credibility that they've tried to build among their supporters and in other key electoral regions for them, like Quebec. If this is a watered-down mess that the Kenney and Ford and Moe don't think is enough, Scheer doesn't think is enough,
The environmentalists
and the environmentalists
it's gone
think it's
too
too
far.
much. I don't think there's. Robin described it well. This debate is so polarized. The people that are active in it have one choice each side wants to make: either kill it or reinforce it. And if you do neither, I don't think there's a happy middle that will rally to this and say, hey, that was a good decision.
Right.
Although Jason Kenney did say today, he did mention before, the way he worded it, I paraphrase, but he'd say, can it be fixed or do we kill it? He did acknowledge that there could be improvements, which I'm looking for signs from the new premier that he's a very shrewd guy.
Yep.
And there's things that he's going to want to get that he's going to need to cooperate with Trudeau on. Yeah. And I wonder if that was a bit of a gesture.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Kenney has a problem in that he can't build pipelines. He just can't. It's not his purview to actually go out and build this Trans Mountain pipeline. So he actually has to, as Greg's alluding to here, find a partner to get this done. And he can't just win this in the courts. That's just not going to happen. He needs the government of Canada to say, okay, we can do this because of X, Y, and Z. So I think he does have to look in that compromising position. The problem for the government is they didn't first sell the idea before they tried to sell a bill that nobody understood. So let's remember, this started with Stephen Harper, who changed the process and gutted it. So then, whether it was the NDP or the Liberals that won the last election, this was going to get changed.
Have to develop a new
this was going to get changed. Okay. And I just don't think that they did the job in the front end to say, this is why we need this, and this is why this is reasonable.
This is the problem we're going to solve.
Okay.
Right.
Parliamentary Budget Officer, officially launching today this review of campaign platform proposals. Kind of interesting. Parliament's conferred this power upon the PBO, or asked them to do it, asked the office to do it. Tim, let me start with you. All the parties have signed on to it, apparently, except, I'm not sure about Max Bernier's People's Party, but the Conservatives. Conservatives say they're going to have an outside company review
Can
their.
you audit a coloring book?
They're going to have an outside.
That's paint by numbers, good numbers. They're all in the black.
They're going to have an outside company. Can that be a liability in a campaign if all the other parties are saying we've subjected ours to the non-partisan independent PBO and the Conservatives out saying, oh, we have this other company, look at our numbers.
I guess it will depend on who that outside company is. If it's a major national
Can any outside company have more credibility these days than the parliamentary budget?
Well, I think so. Those have been around a little longer. But the public will determine if they take that particular view you're mounting there, that it should be all three or that should be the public PBO doing it, and that we'll only believe the PBO. So if the Conservatives choose not to use the PBO, they better have a very valid third party that's seen as nationally credible, and people who will come out and say, you know what, we did the audit here, and here is what we found.
Do Conservatives have a problem with the PBO?
Conservatives always had a problem with the PBO.
They weren't big, even though they created it, they weren't necessarily the biggest fans of it before, and challenged when Mr. Page was there his modus operandi. I don't know if they have the same direct challenge with this or if it's just an institutional bias.
It seems to me, if you look at the office over time, sure, it's critical of the government in power. I don't think this PBO has been any special friend of
No.
You know, the financial
And that's-
policies.
that's what's great about the
His
PBO.
job is to look at the numbers.
Yeah, they're an
and-
officer of Parliament. I mean, we have a parliamentary system of government where government comes from Parliament. But when you're an officer of Parliament, you're not beholden to the Prime Minister's office, which is very different. And I think that's where the credibility comes from. And there is something nice, I think, as a voter or a consumer of all the news that could be questionable in an election campaign, to know that there's some kind of arbiter of at least the facts that get put on the table.
Is it a
in terms
problem,
of-
though, that the PBO, as he said in this program earlier, the PBO is only going to look at proposals if the parties present them the proposals, and it also allows for parties to test drive proposals. They can come to the PBO and say, here's what we're proposing, can you crunch our numbers? And the PBO comes back, this is what's going to cost you, your numbers are off, it's way more expensive. And they go, okay, change our mind on that one. He'll have been approached, but he doesn't ever have to release the proposals they put before him if they don't want to follow
But is
through
that
on them.
actually a problem? I'm honest, this is like some brainstorming thing right now, because
Do you think
just
it
think
is,
about the
Greg?
fact that
I know it is, and I won't say what the election was and what the party was, but I know of a case where the math was wrong. And
I could say many elections.
no, but there was a big error that came back later to haunt. And I think in this case, like when I heard this announcement, I thought, well, you know, that could have prevented that opportunity, that mistake. I think the challenge will be for the Conservatives if you have all the other parties lined up and they say they're PBO approved. It just seems like why is this one party outside?
What I like about it, though, is so if we're all using different accounting systems. So right now, Doug Ford comes to power, and all of a sudden questions the way the Liberals were doing accounting in Ontario. It was a big issue. The Liberals had one system of accounting, Doug Ford had a different system of accounting. So we're either, you know, $6 billion in a surplus or we're $9 billion in a deficit. What voters are kind of going is, why do I believe any of you? This is how people start disconnecting from the center and from where decisions are made, is when none of it makes any sense. So I like the idea of there being at least one common denominator that says, we're using this system of math. So you can come out and say, this adds up to 0, vote for us. But if I have at least somebody independently coming in saying that you might think it adds up to 0, but I'm going to tell you it adds up to negative $3 billion, that at least lets me feel like somebody's on my side.
But then you could have a national accounting and advisory firm who's been doing this for 100 years and whose reputation
Just
is
got to
on
privatize.
No. But
I
these
guess the-
businesses have their reputations on the line as well. They get it wrong.
But isn't the challenge that Parliament decided to confer this function on the parliamentary budget officer, and if all the parties sign up to it, saying, yeah, we put our stock in this person and in this office to get it right, and that's why it's there, that's why we created it, that's why we gave it this role, and one party's going, I don't think so. We're going to do
then
it.
that party's going to have to explain why. I agree, as Greg has said, it's not without risk, but I don't think the risk is so significant that you're locked into doing it. And I don't know what the specific rationale for not de facto saying yes is to it, but I can also see how you can legitimately make another choice.
Now, I don't know ultimately where the Conservatives will end up. I mean,
Right.
maybe they'll end up having stuff costed out initially, and then running it by the PBO, and if there's no big difference,
Yeah,
you know, and with that vetting role I talked about earlier, then
It
they
kind
go,
of fits with their brand, though, of being kind of contrary. Shameless plug, the company I work for did a CAN Trust Index about levels of
Yes.
trust, and there's a huge drop in trust in institutions. So one of the other reasons
we've seen
I
a
like
number
this,
of surveys, trust in institutions,
Yeah,
trust in governments.
Perhaps it makes Canadians aware that the PBO exists, and this is something that they do, and I think that could be ultimately a good thing.
I like to think of it, I like the idea of the resource too, though. Like, just back to the idea of whether or not they can test it.
Somebody
Because
else pays for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's not where I'm going at.
Okay.
I like the idea that the decisions that are made in Ottawa are informed by fact. So the idea that once a party puts it forward and says we're going to bring in this big infrastructure program and it's only going to cost $10 billion a year, which was the Liberal Party, now we're looking at things that are much bigger. At least knowing that they were informed by outside advice to say that this is what I think this will cost, that makes me think going to the ballot box that the things that I like in a given platform were informed by third-party opinion.
It does
as
take
point of
away what
development.
and we'll finish on this, does take away what we see in a lot of campaigns is somebody makes a proposal and the other side goes, that's going to cost the moon, you're going to bankrupt the country, now you can
We'll
wave
see if it
something in
does,
front of
yeah.
them that says,
Yeah.
look, I've had it test driven. You know?
Yeah,
all right,
absolutely.
I know about numbers a little bit when they tell me we're out of time. So that's our time. Thank you all.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you.